Started reading it, by the way.
Welcome to the Mirowitz Center Fell program today. And Rabbi Stiffman is going to speak on the future of Judaism, and John Regman is going to introduce Rabbi.
Good morning, everybody. I see we've got a nice crowd already, 36 people and more to come, I'm sure. Good morning. I'm happy to see so many of you here to hear my rabbi, Jeff Stiffman. Jeff tells me that some people say he doesn't need an introduction, he needs a conclusion. You're supposed to laugh.
I fed you that line.
Yes, you did. Nevertheless, Rabbi Jeff has a great perspective on the evolution of our Jewish community. Not only has he lived here since 1965, but he has researched the Sheremeth Reformed community and written his landmark book, 150 Years of Congregation Sheremeth, which I meant to hold up, but I left it in my office upstairs. But it's a great book. Read it. Jeff has served a total of 57 years at Sheremeth as assistant rabbi, co-rabbi, and at age 26 became our senior rabbi. And in 2004, he was elevated to Rabbi Emeritus. He is proud of the fact that he's a fourth generation Reformed Jew. He started back, I guess, at the beginning of the century there. He's proud of Rabbi Jeff has seen massive changes in the Jewish community, and the westward expansion and movement of Jews led to congregations to follow their migration, and eventually the demise and merger of many congregations. He has served on many community boards, has been honored nationally by the Central Conference of American Rabbis, and is past president of the National Association of Retired Reform Rabbis. Jeff is married to Arlene Stiffman, and they are parents of Dr. Michael Stiffman, Marty Zuckerman, and Cheryl Mayan. They have 8 wonderful grandchildren, he says, and I'm sure they are. Also, please join me in congratulating Rabbi Jeff, who this Friday evening is celebrating his second bar mitzvah at Sheremeth. Mazel tov.
Thank you.
And now I give you my rabbi, Rabbi Jeff Stiffman. Take it away.
Thanks, John. It's an honor to be introduced by you, and I'm very, very happy to be with Mirowitz once again. A lot of the webinars have been just wonderful, and I really, especially during the pandemic and even now when we're playing it safe, the ability to share together, see so many friends and friendly faces is really something that helps lift the spirit. So I want to thank you very much. And what I'll try to do in the hour that we have is leave some time for questions at the end, but to share some thoughts about the American Jewish community and its future. When I was a student rabbi at the Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati, I formed a special bond with one of my teachers, Dr. Jacob Rader Marcus, who was the father of the scientific study of American Jewish history. Before he came along, there was no organization or scholarly interest in studying the American Jewish community. And in the 30s, when he saw what was happening in Europe, he said, we could be the premier Jewish community in the world if Hitler has his way, and we better start studying it. So it was under him that I wrote my master's rabbinical thesis, and then with some of his help and others wrote my PhD thesis as well in the field of American Jewish history. So it's been a passion of mine since then. And as John said, working on the book on the history of Sheremeth, which incidentally is the best-selling book on the history of Sheremeth ever written, because it's the only one. Being able to delve into our past is always something that's very interesting to me. Okay, the greatest historian of American Jewish history today is a man by the name of Jonathan Sarna, who had also studied with Dr. Marcus. Sarna is a very distinguished professor at Brandeis, and he has written the major book on the history of the American Jewish community. And when the second edition came out a few years ago, he made a statement that I'd like to begin with and that we can look at together. He says, Jews witness two contradictory trends operating in our community: assimilation and revitalization. In other words, there's a great amount of assimilation into the American ethos, the American way of life, less emphasis on the Jewish aspects of lives. And the opposite is, or the other section is revitalization, that a number of Jews are trying to revitalize our Judaism and make it relevant and meaningful, not only for America, but especially for our children and grandchildren and so forth. And he writes, which will predominate and what the future holds, nobody knows. This will be determined day by day, community by community, and person by person. So it's a very personal thing. And what I hope to do is raise some facts and some thoughts so that each of us who are on this webinar can think about this in our own lives and in the lives of our families and friends. When he brought his second volume of his book, which was about, the first volume was about 20 years ago, he wrote, look how the world has changed just in the last 20 years. The LGBTQ community, which was ignored basically by the Jewish community, has come out in the open, and there are so many strides. Secondly, he says there's a growing number of Jews of color through adoption, conversion, intermarriage, and the coming of Sephardi and Mizrahi Jews from Israel. I was looking at my daughter's school, the Mirowitz School, has a wonderful newsletter each Friday afternoon. They publish it for Shabbat, and they have pictures of the kids. And a number of the kids are not white. And these are Jewish kids who are learning about Judaism, so that there's an increasing number of Jews of color. Interestingly enough, 70% of adoptions by Jews have been transracial. The third that he mentions is the decline of the conservative movement. It's declined by 50% since 1970. And he views this as the decline of the middle, and this is happening in Protestantism as well. A fourth one is the growth of Chabad, and their model as being very different than a membership model of most synagogues. There are no dues, they welcome everybody, and often in many communities, the rabbi is appointed to be there and stays for life. And of course, our Chabad rabbi, a very beloved rabbi, and he has a son and a daughter-in-law and son-in-law here as well, we know as an important part of our community. And then he says the last major thing, and I'll get into this later, is the changing views of Israel. Many of us who are on the webinar lived through 1948, when the State of Israel was founded, through the Six-Day War in 1967, the Yom Kippur War in 73, when we feared the end of Israel through military means. And we remember that and have very, very deep connections. And he says that for many of the younger people, they only know Israel as a military power that supposedly oppresses Arabs as second-class citizens, and that goes against what they've been taught in religious school about caring for the strangers. And so there is a disconnect between the younger and the older generations. Okay, And the question is, will American Judaism survive? Sarna says that Judaism in America was cyclical. We are now in a religious recession, but if you look at American Jewish history, these recessions have often been followed by a religious revival among the young. The synagogue has to survive, but maybe alternate forms of the synagogue will grow, etc. And that's some of the changes that he talked about in the last 20 years. What's unique about American Judaism compared to Judaism in the Europe of old or the Middle East of old? It's totally optional. You or I can say, all right, I've had enough. I'm not going to be consider myself a Jew, or I'm not going to become involved in Judaism. I'm not going to join a synagogue. I'm not going to join a JCC. I'm not going to listen to Mirowitz webinars. I'm just going to be an American. And we are constantly reinventing American Judaism. Historians say that it is not just linear descent. Some people say, oh, the great-grandparents were Orthodox, the grandparents were conservative, the parents were Reform, and the kids have joined a church. This has not been proven by statistics or by those who study American Jewish trends and American Judaism. Yes, there's some who have, but there are many who have not. In American Jewish history, there were 3 different reactions to the world, the modern world. If you go back even to the 1800s, one was the tradition is totally important and we must keep it in an American way. And this is what we would call today modern Orthodoxy, not ultra Orthodoxy, but modern Orthodoxy. We're Americans, we live in America, but we maintain our traditions. The second was Reform. Judaism needs to change for it to survive. And the early reformers in some of the platforms, like in 1885, said we no longer accept halacha, traditional laws. We accept only that which is uplifting and spiritual, blah, 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 blah. This movement of reform, while it has returned to many of the traditions, and I think if you look at today's Jewish Light online, if you don't get it, you should. It's very interesting. Every day, Rabbi Shook has an article in which he says, Rabbi Isaac Mayer Wise, who was the president of the Hebrew Union College, would be turning over in his grave if he saw what's happening in Reform Judaism today. And then there was a third reaction, and that was, we're not interested in religion, we're interested in the ties of peoplehood, the importance of the unity of the Jewish people. That's how B'nai B'rith got started many years ago in the 1800s. The Federation movement was started, the Zionist movement. Regardless of your religious ideology, this was one of the answers to living as a Jew in the modern world. So today we have questions that we ask. Should we focus on quality or should we focus on quantity? Should we try to keep as many people in the Jewish fold as possible? Should we embrace intermarriage as a way to enhance Judaism, or should we call it a disaster and try to forbid it? Should we build religious bridges or boundaries? How can we harmonize Jewish teachings with contemporary culture? And will American Judaism survive? Since World War II, we were the strongest Jewish community on earth. But since around the year 2000 to 2010, Israel has become the largest Jewish population center in the world. So there are now two diverse sections of two diverse leadership sections of Judaism in the world today. I'll share some of the findings of the Pew report. The Pew Foundation, as you know, is a major foundation that surveys different groups. They've surveyed Protestantism, they've surveyed Christianity, and 2 years ago, they published a second major survey on Jewish life. So we find today that Jewish population of America is 1.8%. And this is due to the declining Jewish birth rate. As you know, 1.8% is not replacing what we have now. So that drop in population is something that's very serious to us. You know, our Haredi brothers and sisters are having 10 and 12 children to fight this. Most Jews are not. There are vanishing rates of Jewish immigration to America as the Soviet Union emptied out. We'll have to see what happens with this horrible Ukrainian situation. Interestingly enough, there was an article in the Israeli press that many Ukrainian Jews are choosing to go to Germany rather than to go to Israel, even though the Jewish agency is there at the border offering free flights to anyone who goes and the opportunity to become citizens of the state of Israel. There's also a declining rate of conversion to Judaism, which I did not know because our classes here in St. Louis still seem to be pretty full. But they say this is due to the fact that the Reform movement passed many years ago the idea of patrilineal descent. If one of the parents if the father is a dedicated Jew and the parents raise that child with a Jewish education following Jewish life cycle ceremonies, that child will be considered Jewish, even though the Orthodox tradition states that only the child of a Jewish mother is Jewish. And because of this patrilineal descent and the fact that many congregations consider these children Jewish, fewer of the parents have opted to convert. And most important, the burgeoning effects of non-marriage. Many of us have family members or friends who are living in a relationship for many, many years without the benefit of legal or religious marriage. Late marriage. Many of our young people are not getting married. Like when we got married, I was 21, Arlene was 18. In those days, you got married. Many are waiting to 30 or more, so we're losing a half of generation as this goes along. And of course, the big elephant in the room is intermarriage. We also find that today, American Jews view the Jewish people differently than a few years back. Today, the image of Jews spread throughout the world as a universal people, if you study it, really doesn't hold true. 80% of the Jews of the world live in the United States and Israel. 80% of the Jews of the world live in 5 cities. Want to guess? Tel Aviv, New York, LA, Haifa, and Jerusalem. Many others live in tiny, unsustainable communities, but their kids are moving to better environment and safer places. Many of us are familiar with the Jewish communities of Southern Illinois. When I was a student, I served a high holiday pulpit in Cairo, Illinois. There are no Jews left there. There were a whole bunch of small congregations in small towns of Illinois. Many of the parents came, or grandparents came to find a new place to live in freedom and a place where they could set up a store or a medical practice or whatever. Their children and grandchildren find small town living constricting. They don't have the Jewish and cultural milieu that they would like to live in. So a lot of these communities have gone to the point where either they use a student rabbi once a month, or a number of them have simply closed up shop. And we had people who sent their children from many communities in Southern Illinois to our congregations here to get a Jewish education. And it's a great problem because I hope Arlene will get that. As we constrict, we're a smaller part of the world. And what will happen to the Jewish community, we don't know. It depends on each of us. Okay, I'll give you just some quick summaries of the Pew report. The latest reports count 7.5 million Jews in America compared to 6.7 million in 2013. So the demographic doomsday might not completely hold, but if we dig a little deeper into that, 1.5 of those 5.8 million Jews identify as Jews of no religion. More than 40% of married Jews have a non-Jewish spouse, and that number rises to 61% of Jews who were married in the last decade. Outside of the Jewish population, there are 2.8 million American adults who had at least one Jewish parent, but who either identify with a different religion or with no religion at all. Only about half of those 8.6 remain firmly, faithfully, and unmistakably within the Jewish fold. So it's been unsuccessful. While the Jewish people have been so successful in America, maintaining and reproducing itself has not been as successful. Compared with the older Jew, younger Jewish adults include larger shares, listen to this, of both Orthodox and nuns. Nuns, not Catholic nuns, but nuns meaning no religion. Today, according to the Pew report, 37% identified as Reform, 17% as conservative, 9% as Orthodox, 4% as other branches, and 32% as no particular branch. Another problem is that the Jewish community is becoming increasingly polarized. Members who were polled who identified as Orthodox said they have not much or nothing at all in common with Reform Jews. 39% of Reform Jews say they had not much in common with Orthodox Jews, and 21% say not at all common. So this is a concern, and I know that in St. Louis, we are, I think, especially lucky that we have very good relationships between the different groups, although they can't be official, but the Jewish Federation does a wonderful job of bringing all the rabbis together to work on communal projects. And I have to say that some of my best friends are Orthodox rabbis. Another thing that the Pew identifies, 71% of Jews who were polled identified as Democrats, 26% as Republicans. But in the Orthodox camp, 20% of the Orthodox said they were Democrat, and 70 to 80% said they were Republicans. 15% are not white, 10% are immigrants. And the views on Israel have been changing, as I mentioned before. 50% of those under 30 describe themselves as very or somewhat emotionally attached to Israel, compared with 2/3 of the people who are age 65 and above. Under those who are under 30, 35% say caring for Israel is essential, but 25% say Israel is not important to what Judaism means to them. 10% of the Jews who were polled support BDS, the boycott, sanctions. 43% of the Jews oppose it, and 43% said they don't even know what BDS means. So we're not communicating with our people about one of the really dangerous anti-Semitic movements in America. And overall, 80% of them say caring for Israel is an essential or important part of what being Jewish means to them. So some have said that reaching the younger generation of Americans, Birthright Israel has been amazing in turning this around. And I know people in my own family and friends, children and grandchildren who once they get there with Birthright and see what the reality is on the ground, it becomes much more important to them. The article that John provided from the Wall Street Journal dealt with one of our really deep concerns today, and that anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial have made Jews feel unsafe in America, perhaps for the first time. 75% of the people polled say that there's more anti-Semitism than 5 years ago. A lot of us agree, and a lot of us count that as with the election of Trump and his pride in some of these people. You know, there's good voices on both sides. 50% feel less safe than they did 5 years ago. 75% have said they have heard someone say or read about someone who denies the Holocaust. It used to be somewhat of a cliche that as the American Jewish community was doing so well and assimilation was up, some people said, well, we need a little anti-Semitism because anti-Semitism helps strengthen people's Jewish pride, okay? In this survey, 5% of the people, only 5%, report that they stayed away from synagogue or a Jewish event because of the fear of a terrorist attack. 80% say they feel a deep sense of belonging to the Jewish people. 75% say that being Jewish is very or somewhat important to them. So the anti-Semitism has not lessened the feeling about being Jewish among the majority of these people who were surveyed. This is not going to surprise you. I drove up Schutz Road the other day for the first time in over a year because I had to deliver a check for the Ukrainian fund to the Federation. And I was shocked by seeing how the building had changed and how large the Holocaust Museum and Learning Center is. 75% of the people say that remembering the Shoah, the Holocaust, is essential to their Jewish identity. Over 50% say that working for justice and equality, being intellectually curious, and continuing family traditions are essential. Only 15% of those surveys said following halakha, the traditional law, is important. But of course, 83% of the Orthodox did as well. Only 12% attend services weekly or more often. And the top reason for not attending services, I'm not religious, or I'm just not interested, or I express my Judaism in other ways. But those people who said they expressed their Judaism in other ways also listed that they follow Jewish cultural activities as well. Over 75% enjoy Jewish foods. That's including heartburn. They share culture or Jewish holidays with non-Jewish friends. And when they're traveling abroad, visit Jewish historic sites and read Jewish literature. I love it when some of my friends who come to temple on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur tell me they were in Italy and the beautiful synagogue in Florence and the ghetto in Rome and all these places. And it's interesting, there is that connection. And what does it mean for modern day synagogues and community leaders? We're going to have to look at different models of what a flourishing synagogue or community center looks like. Look at most of the Reform and conservative synagogues today, and many of them are much like Jewish community centers. Activities throughout the week. You could go to synagogue 5 days a week and not attend worship services. And this is showing that being Jewish to many people is not only worship, but is doing Jewish, as they used to say. So calling the synagogue the Beit Knesset, the house of meaning, the house of gathering, it seems that of the three traditional views of the synagogue as a house of worship, a house of gathering, and a house of learning, of study, that the house of gathering is high. Now, I got to tell you that when I was the senior rabbi of our congregation, we had to go to Cincinnati, New York, to our seminaries to interview senior students when we were looking for assistant rabbis. It was a very interesting thing. I would usually go with the president of the congregation, and maybe if I had a long-term associate rabbi and we were looking for more, he or she would go with me as well. And one of the big questions when I went to visit was, will the rabbi, the student who's about to become a rabbi, officiate at intermarriages? When I stopped going back in the 90s was the last time I went, I'd say that 85 to 90% of the student rabbis would not officiate at an intermarriage. They felt that this was a betrayal of their idea of Judaism, and that as a rabbi, they could only marry a Jew to a Jew. I grew up in a more liberal atmosphere. My rabbi, when I was growing up, did officiate, and I did too. So I would ask him questions like, I'm scheduled to officiate at an intermarriage and I get sick with the flu. Even though you wouldn't do it ordinarily, would you do it in my place? And the answers were, there's a lot of stuttering. There was a lot of thinking about what was going on. And afterwards, a couple of the students said, you had the trickiest question of all the rabbis who came to interview us. In the Pew survey, more of the people said it's important for future grandchildren to have their political convictions or to carry on their family name rather than to marry someone who is Jewish. 42% of married Jews have a non-Jewish spouse today. 2/3 of those surveys said that rabbis should officiate, and only 9% objected. And the majority of the married couples, of the intermarried couples, are raising their children as Jewish. And intermarriage, of course, is most common upon the recently married. In my day and age, there were very few. America has opened up. There's not the anti-Semitism, the social anti-Semitism keeping Jews out of clubs and out of certain areas that there was. And therefore, the rate of intermarriage and the rate of rabbis officiating is going up. I'll tell you something that really shocked me, okay? I talked to a recent ordinee of the Hebrew Union College, and I said, what percentage of the young nascent rabbis would officiate at intermarriages? And her answer to me was almost everyone. And I said, what are the big problems today? And she said, there are students who are in a long-term relationship or married to a non-Jew who want to come to the school to be ordained as rabbis. And so far, the Hebrew Union College has rejected this, saying that they would only ordain students who are married to a Jew. So how things have changed when the last I went there in the late 90s was the big question of intermarriage, and the question today being very different. So all of these facts lead us to different thoughts and to different predictions. And there was a quote which was attributed to the great philosopher Yogi Berra, who said, we should never make predictions, especially about the future. Since I saw this, I found that other people said it was Casey Stengel, other people found it in Mark Twain, and others found similar type of comments going back to the classical Greek literature. But I'll stick with Yogi Berra because he was a St. Louis guy and we like him. The question is, the truth is that we cannot make predictions. Yet throughout American Jewish history, there have been periods of up and down. And there were periods when scholars and Orthodox rabbis and even Reform and conservative rabbis predicted that the rate of intermarriage and assimilation would doom the American Jewish community, and that the only community that's going to be left is the ultra-Orthodox community, which keeps halacha, which keeps the holidays and the traditions. Most scholars of American Judaism, and they are across the board, Orthodox, conservative, Reconstructionist, Reform, and there are many scholars of American Judaism in many important universities and think tanks today. Many of them have said what Sarna said, what I said at the beginning. It's not linear. It doesn't always mean that we're going to lose out. And the fact that we are here, despite all the predictions, Sarna said, history suggests that we will find creative ways to maintain Jewish life. A vanishing generation might be followed by another vanishing generation, by another vanishing generation, and that we are going to be able to continually live within a Jewish community as our ancestors did since the first Jews arrived in 1654. So I'm going to stop here and open it to questions.
So there was a question in the chat from Leslie, and her question is there a drop-off in the enrollment of future rabbis at any of the seminaries?
There's a very serious future drop-off. And my seminary, the Hebrew Union College, is in the throes of a very emotional decision about closing the rabbinic program in one of the campuses. When I was a student, all 5 years were in Cincinnati. It was only later that the first year program was moved to Israel. In my class, there were 23, in those days, guys, okay? Now, in the Cincinnati campus, where there are 4 years, because the first year is in Jerusalem, there are 22 students total over the 4 years. I was privileged to serve in a couple of communities, Terre Haute and some others, as a rabbinic mentor. I would work with the student rabbi, usually it was a third-year student, if they wanted on their sermons, if they had a question about a member came for counseling. And once during the year, we would travel to that community to see them in action, okay? When I went there the first time, there were 6 of us who were mentors, and we met for a day at the campus. And I said to the person who was in charge of the program, you only have 6 mentors here. What do the rest of the students do? And she said to me, that's the class, six students. So we have seminaries in New York, Cincinnati, and Los Angeles, as well as, of course, our Jerusalem campus. The Jerusalem campus houses the first-year students, and this is becoming a little bit of a controversy too. And it also ordains Israeli Reform rabbis. It doesn't ordain other Reform rabbis. They have to come either to Europe, where there's the Leo Beck Seminary, or here to America. Okay. The New York school was founded by Rabbi Stephen Wise and went out of business. It folded into the Hebrew Union College in the 1940s. So that's an important campus, an important city. The Los Angeles campus, when I was a student, only taught the first 2 years of rabbinic training. And then for the next 3 years, I had to go either to New York or Cincinnati. Now, the Los Angeles campus has a full 5-year rabbinic program, as well as the educational program. My daughter got her master's in Jewish religious education there, and a school of Jewish social work. So the total number of students in all those schools is so small that the board is looking at a plan to close the rabbinical program in Cincinnati. If you want to see more about it, if you go to jta.org, that's the Jewish Telegraphic Agency. That's the agency. You can get their newsletter free every day, that a lot of the light articles come from. You'll see it says JTA. It's sort of the Jewish Associated Press. There's a long article about that today and yesterday's news bulletin, but it's created a tremendous amount of anger by graduates of the Cincinnati school who want to keep it going. And a lot of that anger is aimed at the new president of the Hebrew Union College, Andrew Rayfeld. Poor guy, became president and all this hit, and he's handling it beautifully, but I think they're going to close it. Yes, the Conservative Jewish Theological Seminary has a serious problem. The Reconstructionist Rabbinical College is almost close to closing. The Independent Hebrew College in Boston has a smaller number of students. This is reflected also in Protestantism and in Catholicism. As you know, the Archdiocese is working on a plan to possibly close a number of diocesan schools and possible churches. And I read the Catholic newspaper and commiserate with Archbishop Brzezinski, because he's similar to Rayfeld. He came into this and then boom, all this stuff hits. So there is a problem with organized religion. The only ones that are holding their own are the evangelicals, and to some extent, although they're much smaller, the ultra-Orthodox.
So we have a
Okay.
few questions, and I'm just going to say Harvey, and then Marilyn, Sharon, and then Marty. So Harvey Gerstein. Unmute yourself, Harvey.
Unmute yourself from Arizona, Harvey.
I'm sorry, but I want to thank you for the great presentation. And I've always been bothered by the fact that conservatism will not perform intermarriage. I can understand more with the Orthodox, but I think it turns people away if you come and say, will you marry me? Even though I'm going to bring my children up Jewish, and the rabbi says, no, I can't marry you. And I just wonder how many people that turns off. Also, I know more of our kids are going away to grandkids are going away to the different kinds of college. And I know I asked my granddaughter who is studying to be an engineer, how many Jewish boys are there in your school? And she said 2. So that makes it difficult. And my third point is, what effect has the increase in the Muslim community and on campuses affected the feelings towards Israel and Judaism?
Okay, let's go to the last one first. There's a strong Palestinian group that is with a lot of money backing from Arab oligarchs, if you want to call it that, a lot of money that goes into schools and fights any group that is pro-Israel. We had that in Duke recently, where they got the one of the student bodies to pass a resolution that the school should not support not only any pro-Israel organization, but even the pro-peace ones like J Street, who are more liberal, that by dealing with these groups, you are allowing the Zionists to flourish. So that's a very, very serious problem. I know that B'nai B'rith and ADL and a number of other organizations are working with students to try to blunt this. For some students, it's become a calling cry to defend the Jewish people. For other students, some of them go along with it. Some of them join Jewish Voices for Peace, which is a total that's my phone, anti-Israel. I'm sorry, your other 2 questions, one was?
RV, unmute yourself.
Yeah, and I'm sorry. The other one was not performing intermarriages.
Oh, yes, right. I always thought that I should officiate because it brings people in. I didn't want to push people away. In many of the cases where I have officiated, the fact that they had a warm, welcoming rabbi, the fact that the congregation, if the Jewish partner was a member, offered them a free membership for the first year. Often it worked, sometimes it didn't, okay? But I felt it was important to be open to them. The conservative movement, dealing more with halakha, feels very strongly that they shouldn't. I can only tell you that 2 of my dearest friends, Lipnick and Scoff, used to call me and say, hey, guess what? And I'd say, you have a member who's getting intermarried and you'd like me to do the wedding because you told him that you can't. And I always worked with the couple to try to tell them why those rabbis were unable to do it, but they still love them. And some of those couples did return to their congregation, but some became Reformed. But that was my feeling. The tradition says, no, it's going to cause the demise of Judaism. I'm hoping that the statistics say that it doesn't. You had one other question, I think.
No, that
That's
takes
it.
care of it.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Marilyn, you had your hand up next.
Okay, I've got a couple of questions, and thank you so much for everything, for your talk. I've had people come up to me, or not come up to me, but say that they think that what's happening in Ukraine is like what Hitler and the Nazis and the Holocaust did. Number one, what's your feeling about that? And number two, you touched just for a second, you mentioned the evangelicals, and I really follow them. I'm Jewish, and so many of them have raised so much money for Israel, especially this John Hagee. And I remember I asked Abraham Foxman what he thought of the evangelicals, and Hagee in particular. He didn't like them, only because he thought they were doing it for publicity. I disagree. And I was just wondering what you thought about those 2 questions.
The first one was again?
The first one was when people say that what's happening in Ukraine.
Yes. Right.
Yes.
Right. Okay. The Prime Minister of Israel came out very strongly, and they are much on the defensive, and I think rightly so, because they have not helped the Ukrainians the way the Jewish president of the Ukraine thought that they would. And when he addressed the Knesset yesterday, and I don't know whether you saw it, the Knesset's on recess, so it was all done by Zoom or whatever group they used. He said, Jews of all people remembering the Shoah should help fight evil. And the Prime Minister of Israel said, it's unfair to compare the Shoah to anything. So there are a number of people, and I remember Elie Wiesel saying that as well, that the Shoah was sui generis, was on its own, but he went to the African countries where genocide was taking place. He went to Bosnia and Herzegovina. So it does remind me of an occupying power going in and killing indiscriminately. It does remind me of World War II, the beginnings of World War II. If there's an exact comparison, I don't know, but it seems that history is repeating itself. The second question was
about the evangelicals.
Evangelicals,
raising so much money.
right. This is a mixed bag that I disagree with some of my good friends who are part of We Stand With Israel, that Israel can do no wrong, and that no matter what happens, we should get all the help we can get. There are many people who are convinced that Hagee and others love Israel, but the evangelicals love Israel for a very important reason. According to their theology, when the end of days come, all the Jews will be returned to their homeland. And then when the rapture comes and everyone is brought up to heaven, only the Christians, there'll be the battle of the end of days, only people who believe in Jesus will receive the ultimate reward. So that's a theological position that I cannot accept. Now you have some of these groups today who have sent their people to Poland and other areas and are helping some of the Ukrainian refugees who want to go to Israel to go there, which is very nice, but the whole theology behind it bothers me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sharon, you want to unmute?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Rabbi Jeff. I think Alan and I are in a minority here, which we often are, which is we're not born in St. Louis. So we've had other Jewish experiences. Both of us, I would say I basically grew up with nothing in New York, because when you live in New York, you don't have to affiliate.
Right.
So I grew up with really no instruction whatsoever. Alan was bar mitzvahed and confirmed. That's correct, right? Okay. Then we moved to West Virginia when we were married, and there was a small teeny town in coal country that had a congregation, a synagogue, a place with 20 Jewish families. And this is where I would say, at least for me, and I think for Alan as well, we got our start in Judaism. We had student rabbis who came down every other week. And it's like, I felt like a whole world had opened up to me. And I actually get emotional thinking about it, because my Judaism has continued. I've continued my learning through Pennsylvania and certainly through here, 37 years. And Judaism is very important to me. My sons went to share, our sons, not just me. I do have a hubby here. I tend to talk in the eye, though, it's not good. Went through all the way through Shir Emeth. Dave was married and divorced, has one son who's 12 and a half. No religious education either in his formerly Catholic mother or David, who in our belief has been turned off to Judaism by his ex-wife. But Miles does want to go to a Jewish camp. He went last year. So in the words of another good friend, not yet, and it might still happen. We don't know. And as a Jewish person, we always have hope, right?
That's absolutely.
So there, I wrote all my things down. Okay, not yet. No. Oh, and then I think about Ma Tovu, that we do. Wait a minute. In the city, they have that congregation in the city of young people, and I think we need to do more outreach. Like Chabad. I do have one final thing. Sorry, it's not a question; it's just a comment. I was asked by Rabbi Andrea to be a part of the Clean Speech.
Mhm.
It was really an interesting experience. I enjoyed reading my part. However, the more interesting thing was I got to sit with Rebbitzin David from Chabad. Well, where would I have that opportunity? And we had a conversation as Jewish people.
Mhm.
Where we don't have those interactions, between like you said, between Orthodox and I lost where did Jeff go? He went off
He's over
screen.
there.
Oh, there you are. You moved on my screen.
Right.
So that was a really cool thing. So I try to remain hopeful about things in the future because we don't know.
But yeah, we don't know exactly what will catch people. I know rabbis' kids who received all kinds of education who rebelled against it. I know we had members who did nothing and were negative, and they had a kid who ended up a rabbi. Arlene says that I'm going to go to hell because I sent 12 students to the Hebrew Union College. So she said, you ruined 12 lives. Okay, but we try our best. Someone else?
Yes, we have Marty had his hand up for a while, and then Sheldon. And then we have a couple more people, Sandy and Richard. So Marty, you are
Yes.
next.
First of all, thank you, Rabbi, for a wonderful talk, and
Thank you.
thank you, Myron Holtzman, for inviting me to this Zoom. I talked to you from Madison, Wisconsin.
Right.
I am a member of Temple Bethel, a
Mhm.
Reformed congregation here. My former congregation was in Mattoon, Illinois. I don't know
Oh,
if
sure.
you're familiar with them or not, but that is, I think, the smallest congregation that's affiliated with URJ.
We were there with Mofty at one point with the youth.
Is that right?
Yeah, they had a thing in Mattoon.
Well, when I left there was just a handful of Jewish people, not just in Mattoon, but in the entire area around Mattoon. And I'm struck with looking for creative ways to maintain Jewish life, that you mentioned.
Mhm.
And, one of the things that we have here is Zoom that we never had a few years ago. And I
Sure.
can see that maybe offering Zoom services to places like Mattoon, Illinois, could be a very creative way of using modern technology to keep Jewish life vibrant in these smaller communities. What?
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. First of all, I need to say that one of my daughters was a cheesehead. She's a graduate of the University of Wisconsin, and it's damn cold up there. When we went to visit, we froze. Yes, I know that the reform and conservative movements have put a lot of programming money into trying to do the Zoom. When I was president of the National Association of Retired Reform Rabbis, which is a pretty wild group, I talked for years about we needed to do something other than a one-year convention, and boom, up came COVID and up came Zoom, and now we have a year-long program, and many more retired rabbis who weren't able either physically to go to a convention or financially to go to a convention feel part of it. And I think that this is a real part of the future. One of the sad things is that small town Judaism has a certain vibrancy When I was a student rabbi in Cairo for 10 days, okay, they told me that if so-and-so didn't show up for services, and their Friday night services started at 9:30 because they closed the stores at 9, okay? If somebody didn't show up, they went out to find out what was wrong. And unfortunately, one of the members was murdered the year that right before the time that I was there. But there was that togetherness and that sense that I'm part of this Jewish community and I need to be a part of it. There are wonderful, wonderful services online. I have a friend who's a retired rabbi in Miami Beach where he served, and every Shabbat morning, he tells me, he puts on Park Avenue Synagogue, which is a conservative synagogue in New York. It has this fabulous cantor. A lot of his stuff is on YouTube. And when they're over, when he's finished with that, he goes to Central Synagogue in New York, which has this Rabbi Angela Buchdal, who's amazing. So a lot of people are checking services by Zoom, and it can be very enriching. So I agree with you.
We have Sheldon, and then Sharon Shapiro and Richard. Sheldon?
Sheldon, one of my favorite teachers. Unmute yourself. Unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yes.
sir.
Jeff, thank you for your thought-provoking discussion. I'd like to, if you can, generalize about the response to anti-Semitism on the campuses. What works, what doesn't work, how, and to what degree are Jewish students being mobilized to deal with that issue?
There are a number of groups that are working to mobilize the students. The ADL is somewhat of a clearinghouse, that if one of these incidents arises on campus, and there are many, 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 many of these incidents, it's a coordinated effort by the Students for Palestinian, I forget what it's called, Students for Palestine or something, and other groups. And much of it comes from that group. Students are provided with a lot of materials and even some legal help if they need it, as to where they should go with that. Some of the national Jewish organizations actually have gone to the campuses to argue about it. What usually happens is a group of students corrals a student body, a student government, and they will get them to pass a resolution against Israel as an apartheid state, as a state that discriminates against its citizens, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Often, in most cases, the school administration, the president, the dean say, this will not affect us. We are not going to boycott tractor companies or other things like this. But it's part of a major BDS campaign to get American countries to divest from Israel. Recently, you might have seen again in the JTA bulletin, jta.com or .org, I lost my train of thought, I'm sorry, going to the jta.org. There was an effort to get the Sierra Club to drop its trips to Israel. Now, the Sierra Club has many trips to Israel because Israel is a real pioneer in ecology, and they've done amazing things. So what happened was a group pressured, and some of the professionals gave in, and they announced that they were canceling all their trips to Israel. Well, the reaction was really tremendous, not only from organized Jewish groups, but especially from members of the Sierra Club. And the Sierra Club backed down. They said, we were wrong. We're not political. We're for ecology. and Israel is a model, and we've reinstituted our trips. So a lot of times, a lot of pressure, and there have been some Jewish students on some of these campuses who have really stood up, and that's really made a difference. So many of the national Jewish organizations, the rabbis of Hillel, even the rabbis of Chabad on campus have been very helpful in helping students fight anti-Semitism and protect themselves from it. There are some, unfortunately, terrible bigots who just won't give up, but that's the fringe. Yeah.
Thank you, Rabbi.
We have time for a couple more. John, just a minute. Sandra Shapiro, Richard, and then John Reichman. Sandy, you want to unmute, please?
Do you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, sure. Do we want to, Sandy?
What?
Do we want to hear you?
You're terrific, Jeff. I mean, you are the best. And thank you for this
You're
presentation.
prejudiced. You're prejudiced.
That I am. Anyway, I just wanted to say two things. Number one, this is a takeoff on what Sharon Weissman said. We don't know what the future, we can talk and talk. I just wanted to say, you know, my kids, Jeff, I have a
Sure.
son who moved, we've been members, Sharon's forever, moved to Sweden, married a non-Jew on the promise that she would raise the kids Jewish. They are unaffiliated. My they have Friday night Shabbos and nothing, and just a lot of talk about the history of Israel. My grandson, who is 18, is going to Israel, and he's going to try to be affiliated somehow with this, whatever he's doing. He hasn't graduated yet, but my little one, my 15-year-old granddaughter, she has chosen to go to a Jewish school. Don't ask me how this ever happened. And she is going to visit here in the States and go to a Jewish camp.
Wow, great.
Second son, Craig, is a Chabad. My daughter, she married someone who's more Jewish than we are, more to Chabad. So we are important to our children, to our grandchildren, and I don't think we should minimize that at all. I don't know. I'm not saying I did it, but I don't know. But they know it's important to their Bobby.
That's
That,
great.
you know, everything else is the family. So we are important. I use a little Jewish guilt, Jeff. Anyway, the other thing is, I think, and I only know Sher Emeth, it's true. So I don't know how to put this with love, because I'm going to continue to be a Sher Emeth. But the reform at our temple has become so reform. And I know that meditation and exercise and whatever all these extras are bring people in. I don't know. I don't. It's just become. It's just not a really warm. I don't know. It's too much of the outside stuff. But I know it brings. Do you have an opinion on that, Jeff? About?
Well, I think that different people would disagree, because a lot of Jewish tradition has been introduced into our services. There's a lot more Hebrew, a lot more chanting, and a lot more Torah study, a lot more of the traditional elements of Judaism. So I would say that, yes, we do have the Spirituality Center, which Rabbi Andrea Goldstein has developed. And yes, they do things such as meditation, but it's all within a Jewish context. And there is a movement within National Judaism, which was started by the Institute for Jewish Spirituality, which was led for a while by one of our former assistant rabbis, that has promoted this among not only Reform but conservative and Orthodox synagogues as well. So I would just say that in a large congregation like Sheremetz, there are many different opportunities to plug in. And I'm getting from a lot of people, oh, Sheremetz become too traditional. It isn't the way it was. And I'll tell people, you know, some people say to me, it isn't like it was when you were the rabbi. And I'll tell them, you know what, when I came in, it wasn't like it was when Rabbi Nodell was the rabbi. And when I started out, everybody was still comparing every sermon to Rabbi Gordon. And I told his daughter, Naomi Lebowitz, who I love, that I hated him for many years. He died in 54. I came here in 65, and people would say, your sermon was good, but you should have heard Rabbi Gordon preach. He did this and he did that. So change takes place. And yeah, I'm not as comfortable with some of the things that are happening today. Maybe I liked it a little better when I was in charge. But that's the way the world turns, and I think there are many ways to plug in. I'm sorry, someone else had a question.
We have two more people. We have time for two more. Richard Goldenhirsch and then John Reichman.
Yeah, Rabbi, I loved your talk, and I
Thank you,
will
Your
read
Honor.
the article. And I specifically, you know, I've been to Sheremetz many times. I specifically want to thank you for your support of the smaller Jewish communities in Southern Illinois.
Thank you.
You've been a friend to Caro, obviously, when it existed, to the Belleville Synagogue that merged with East St. Louis and everything. And I want to thank you for that.
Hello.
And your kind and gentle leadership of your congregation. And one comment and then I'll get off. I totally agree with your with the idea of the intermarriage and doing the intermarriage. As a judge, I was sort of the go-to person for intermarriages in the Belleville community.
Right.
And I performed a lot of them because we are so good. We have so much to offer people, such a positive history, culture, and lifestyle that we should be opening our arms to people who have had the good fortune to fall in love with a Jewish person and want to spend their life with them. And we should open the community's arms to welcome them. And we've had, in the Belleville and East St. Louis communities, we've had people who intermarried who were just spectacular members of the community and whose kids have been spectacular members.
Yes.
So thank you for your leadership in that. I completely agree. And I'm still open to doing them if anyone,
Right.
you know.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Your Honor.
John,
Thank you.
John, you need to unmute.
Okay, there I found myself.
Oh, you look familiar.
Hey there. Once again, hello. When I first asked you to speak at this Zoom, I appreciate your agreeing. And I asked you to speak on the subject of will our great grandchildren be Jewish? You kind of subverted that, but in the long run, I think you've answered that question, or at least you've given me some hope. You know, it's even through intermarriage, it's the majority of intermarriages, the children are being brought up Jewish in some way or other. And yes, I totally am in favor of Jewish camps. That's how I got my Judaism, even though I went to Sheremetz when I was 7 years old. It was that Jewish camp that did it to me.
Absolutely. That's one of the great things. I encourage everyone who can get a child or a grandchild or great grandchild to a Jewish camp. It's transformative. It's wonderful.
It is. And thank you for the time. And on behalf of everybody who's watching or who was watching, and the Mirowitz, wishing you a mazel tov on your bar mitzvah, number 2.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Rabbi Stiffman. Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone, for being here today, and have a wonderful day.
You too. Thank you.